how big of a blow that dotcom bubble burst was for the data center industry back then?
Well, 3/4 of our competition went bankrupt. After a crash, you get a lot of zombie companies.
Yeah.
They've still got 100 million in the bank. The CEO still has his driver outside with his S-Class Mercedes. And, he's not going to drop that. He's going to carry on until there's no money left. If I look at pictures of myself at 35, I think, who the hell would invest in that nutter? Look at him. He looks like 18 years old. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Which reminds me to be respectful of young people when they're doing a startup. I just remember myself, just remember. It was a sort of Pyrrhic victory because there were all sorts of things like when we were about to float the business on the night of the float, literally at 11 p.m. the night before we were supposed to go public, we still hadn't covered the book. So they cut in at that lower valuation and pretty much wiped out my shareholding with Christoph. So we lost 2/3 of our shareholding in the space of a couple of hours.
Do you have any good stress management tips?
Playing a band. Take time off. The best thing, the best decisions are made when you're walking around.
Exactly.
Don't stick in the office. But again, it's my ADHD profile. I can't sit down at a desk for more than 20 minutes without getting up. I'm always walking around. So.
Yeah. Welcome back to Why Should We Care About African Data Centers, the podcast where we tackle the big questions shaping the industry. I'm your host, Willner, and my guest today is Guy Willner, a true legend in Africa's data center industry. Guy has been building and investing in data centers for decades, long before most people even had logged on to the internet. Today he's betting on Africa and doing it at scale. Good to have you on the show, Guy.
Thank you very much.
How's life today?
Life's very good. Yeah, enjoying it. I've flown in from Nairobi and from the sun to the sun. So yeah, it's fine.
It's not bad.
All's good. Yeah.
So you're living now in Nairobi?
Yeah, I moved to Nairobi sort of in April this year, really. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Why?
Because I promised my wife to move to France. So
makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, of course, totally logical. So we've lived 29 years in London, doing all my international stuff from London.
Okay.
And so slightly vicarious with all my international projects. And then I promised her that after 29 years we'd move back to France. And then I sort of announced to her one day, well, actually, maybe we just do a slight diversion via Kenya for a couple of years.
Okay.
Because I was thinking that'd be nice. I can live above the shop for a little while, but one of my projects, IXAfrica. Yeah. And I'm working with Helios investment partners across Africa, doing digital infra. So I thought, this is a gig. This would be fun. Children are all working now.
Yeah.
So I've got that second honeymoon moment where none of them are married, haven't got any grandchildren.
Yeah.
So we can spend a couple of years in Kenya. So the idea is a couple of years, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. People always say that, and then they end up staying for long.
It's not my choice. I mean, she wants us to stay. She'll be able to twist my arm quite easily.
Cool. Do you have a favorite place in Africa?
I guess Nairobi is my favorite place at the moment. That's for sure.
Okay.
I've got a piece of land in Kilifi, so I might start building something there. But I think Nairobi's pretty good. Pretty cool place.
Nairobi's good.
Yeah.
It's a good place to live, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, your entry to the data center or industry, the work life started with the engineering degree at Oxford Brookes University in the 80s. What kind of career were you expecting to have back in those days?
Oh God! I mean, that's ancient history. But I was at school in England, and when you're 13 in England, all the girls are riding ponies, and all the boys are in a rock band. And if you're not in a rock band, you're nobody. So some friends of mine came out and said, "Do you want to be a drummer or a bassist?" And I went to the music shop on the weekend and found that drum kits were very expensive. So on the Monday, I said, I'll be a bassist. So bought myself a bass for £20, built myself an amplifier out of an old transistor radio, and away we went. And that was great. Apart from it meant that I failed my exams when I was 18 pretty badly because I was playing music. Bass is one note. I mean, it's not that complicated, but still, it was complicated for me. And we were doing a few gigs and stuff like that. And in the end, I didn't get great results in my A-levels. And so I thought, well, that's bad. All my university choices are out the window. And so I went to Oxford Poly at the time, Oxford Polytechnic, and said, will you offer me a place? And they said, yeah, okay. I deferred it for a year because I thought I needed to grow up a bit. So I did some working around different jobs, feeding cattle, soldering stuff in an electronics factory, and then started Oxford Poly. So that's what took me to Oxford Poly. And it was a great degree because it was a general engineering first year. Second year, I was doing sort of electrical engineering. And third year, I was doing electronics and computing and writing in assembly language. So it was really cool, actually. But I was going to join the Air Force. And because I thought, well, Oxford Brookes is not the number one in the UK. So I should match something with that. So I applied to join the Air Force as an engineer officer. So I was a cadet officer for 2 years, and I could actually afford a car. I had this little Austin Mini, so I'd race around Oxford in. It's very funny. But after about 2 years, I realised that the engineering side of the Air Force wasn't that exciting for me. I'd spent 2 weeks on a radar base in Scotland, and there was just men in the radar base. And I spent a couple of weekends in London, and it was lovely, and everybody was out in the streets and stuff like that. So I was actually, maybe that's not a good idea. So I actually resigned from the Air Force before I started officer training, because I thought either I'd stay for 5 years or I'd leave now. So I left then. And amazingly, the squadron leader, whoever he was, at the Officers' College, north of Cambridge, said to me, "You would have had an interesting career in the Air Force. Do me a favour, don't get yourself in a rut." And I thought, this is gratuitous, information for me from somebody I've just slapped in the face. And it was just so amazing. So I was driving down from Lincoln, north of Cambridge, back down to Oxford, in a crappy old Morris Minor that had cost me £160, and one of the wings was falling off, and thinking, the world's my oyster now. And this message from this guy from the Air Force was, has always stayed with me. Don't get yourself in a rut. So I applied for jobs, and I had a job offer with British Telecom in sort of like West London, doing stuff, whatever, trading systems or something like that. But then I thought, well, actually, I've got a sister who's living in Paris. Why don't I just go out and find a job in Paris and learn French at the same time? So that's what I did. So I went to Paris and got a job writing software, assembly language software at Philips in Paris. So the beginning was a bit crazy, beginning of my career was a bit crazy.
Yeah, I usually don't do this, but like that is so close to my life as well, so I have to bring it up. So at first I want to ask, what happened to the bass and the band?
So the bass and the band. So when I went to Paris, so the bass and the band. When I was doing my last exams, we did some interesting gigs, and there was an A&R guy who came and said, "Yeah, if you keep playing, you might be able to be supporting Big Country or something like that." One of the bands going on at the time. But then everybody went their separate ways, and I went to Paris, and I didn't really play any music there at all. But I did go past often a shop which had a double bass in the window, and one day I just fell in love with the double bass and had to buy it. And so years went by, and I did stuff. So actually, before I left London for about 3 years, we had a jazz trio in London. So I've been playing jazz in London quite a bit, and I got an evil plan to start that up in Nairobi now.
I think we should consider doing that together, because
Yeah.
I didn't give up on my musician dream until I was like 32. So we released 5, 6, 7 odd records, and toured for a lot of road music for TV series, movies even, and
right, okay, I'm in.
Not many movies, but, few. So anyway, good to hear that. That's kind of our shared history.
Yeah.
So okay. Back to the data center stuff. So in '98, you co-founded IXEurope, and you started with the one facility in London. What was the problem you tried to solve back then?
So basically, I spent like 5 years in Paris writing software and selling and product management and stuff like that. And then I'd taken an offer with Vivendi in London to work in telecoms and spent like 3, 4, 5 years there. And that Vivendi business was then sold to a US investor who didn't get the whole business-to-business side of what we were doing. We were selling fibers across London and stuff like that. So I thought, right, I'm out of here. And at that time, telehouse in East London had gone down for 30 minutes in, I think, November 97, something like that. And nobody cared because, not that many people had internet. It was just dial-up rubbish. But I thought, well, in 5 years' time, Goldman Sachs will lose 50 million on a foreign exchange transaction because the internet's down. So we need another data center in West London. And I proposed that to Vivendi, but as they were selling the business, they weren't sort of excited about it. And then once the business was sold, I was kind of holed up in a little office somewhere and nobody seemed to care about me. So I thought, right, I'll start writing my business plan. So it was more the fact that I wanted to build a business, and this looked interesting. I pulled down the accounts of Telehouse Europe and saw that they were doing 30% net profitability, which sounded pretty good to me. So I thought, well, let's try it out.
Okay. How did it go?
So amazingly, it went well, because if I look at pictures of myself, at 35, because now I'm 61, if I look at pictures of myself at 35, I think, who the hell would invest in that nutter? Look at him. He looks like 18 years old. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Which reminds me to be respectful of young people when they're doing a startup. I just remember myself, just remember. But it went well. We were looking for money, and I phoned up 3i in London, which was one of the big PE funds at the time. And I said, look, I've got this plan and I need like £1.5 million to build a data center in central London. And they said, not really interested. And then I talked to some banker friends and they said, ask for 20. So I phoned up some other investment funds and said, I need £20 million. I said, oh yeah, okay, where's your business plan? Business plan, right, yeah. So, everything. I was doing an MBA in life, And luckily I met, during that period, I met a French guy through our wives. My wife's French. And he's the opposite of me. So it was very much yin and yang. I'm the crazy mad dog, business development, sales, engineering, and he's finance, operations, HR, calm, measured. And so he joined me in this crazy venture. And as a result, we raised £10 million in the first round from a sort of a mid-sized private equity firm in London.
Can I ask how, in that moment, obviously you hadn't built a data center before.
No.
So how much did you know about how to build a data center?
Well, I've been in telecoms for 5 years, and we built our own sort of switching center in Slough and stuff like that. So I knew, and I'd been the one who was selecting the telephone exchanges. So I'd been to see Nokia in Oulu in Finland. I talked to Nortel, I talked to Siemens, and Alcatel. So I sort of understood the engineering side, and I'm an engineer anyway. But we did meet up with who's now a really good friend, Frank Hassett, who was working we just left Telehouse at the time, and he'd helped built one of the first data centers in London. So we had somebody who really knew what he was talking about.
Okay. So you built that, and
so the first phase was basically they said, okay, here's £10 million, but the catch is we're going to release the money slowly. So do your proof of concept first. So we'd found this ground floor right in the middle of the city in London, near Finsbury Square. And it was a ground floor, 500 meters office space that had been the data center for Yamaichi Bank, which is a Japanese bank that had gone bankrupt. It had been converted back into office space, but all the ingredients were there to build a mini data center. So we built it out. And it filled up fairly quickly because Telecom New Zealand was setting up a switching center, and they had stuff in Docklands in crates waiting for a data center. So we put them in. We put Telstra in there as well from Australia. And as that went quite well, we then signed a lease on a building in Heathrow and one in Paris near Charles de Gaulle.
Okay. And in terms of capacity, what was the capacity? I
think the City of London one was probably about 300 kilowatts or something like that. It was a tiny little thing. It was awful. I mean, we actually switched it off about 2-3 years ago, and I went there and I absolutely didn't shed a tear. It's like looking at some student flat you had. Fine, okay, that's fine. I don't need to see it again. It was a miserable little data center with 30 centimeter raised floors, and it was.
How was it cooled with your traditional air conditioning, or
I think there were air conditioners on the roof. It was all DX and stuff like that on the roof and stuff like that. Since then, that building's been demolished, so that has been vaporized. The whole building was demolished and redeveloped. Yeah.
Okay, and did you manage to build more data centers then?
Across
Europe?
Yeah, so then we had a lease in a building about 4,000 meters in Heathrow, and I remember walking through the door, having signed that lease, thinking, "Oh shit, this is big," and how the hell are we going to fill this? And we were going to build 2 floors of data center in it, and then we had Paris. I remember in Paris, we were just about to get Capgemini around to visit what was essentially a warehouse that we were going to build as a data center to sell them part of our data center. And unfortunately, during the weekend, about 30 gypsy caravans had come in. They, with bolt cutters, they cut the thing and everything. They parked all the way around this data center. They'd hacked into the electricity. They were plugged into the water. And Christoph, my associate, who's very diplomatic, he went to sort of see them about 4 hours before Capgemini arrived and said, "Would you mind just for like 4 hours moving all your caravans to the back of the data center? I mean, you can come back afterwards." And so they did. So Capgemini saw it, but it was crazy times.
So when those guys came in, the caravan was still there.
No. I mean, they came visited. The caravans were at the back. They visited. They didn't see the caravans.
Oh, okay. So you hid it at the back. Okay.
They're all hidden. And so time went on. We that was in like June 99. We had our first round of 10 million.
Yeah.
June 2000, we then raised 42 million pounds. So it's big stuff on what was essentially PowerPoint shows. Then we had JP Morgan saying, "We're going to float you on London Stock Exchange. You need to sign more leases." So we signed a lease in Barcelona, one in Milan, one in Amsterdam, and this is leasing pretty big warehouses on 25-year leases. And then, of course, everything started collapsing. The bubble was bursting and whatever.
Yeah.
And so the float was pulled. And I remember being invited to Cliveden, which is a beautiful hotel outside London in Henley. Beautiful, beautiful hotel. By JP Morgan as the star guest at their annual tech conference, where they'd reserved me this amazing suite. Unfortunately, my wife couldn't come because we had little children and stuff like that. So, but we'd failed the float. We pulled the float. So when I got there, it was a bit like I had COVID. Everybody was avoiding me. It was like, "Oh, his float failed. I don't want to get too close. Maybe my float will fail too." So it was a bit sad. And then we had to get out of these leases and negotiate. And we managed to negotiate. And we had a really great guy, Harro Boyska, who's with us, who's now running Enlighten, founded Enlighten. Yeah. And he was negotiating us out of these leases. Which was complicated, but he did it amazingly well. He's a fantastic negotiator. So we managed to exit Barcelona, Amsterdam, and Milan, and focus on what we had. And I remember one of the meetings was a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous, because the internet bubble had burst. We were running out of cash, but we had operations now in Frankfurt, in Zurich, in Paris, and London. And we had to keep these plates spinning. And we were in the middle of builds. Yeah. And so we had this sort of slightly Alcoholics Anonymous meeting where in the senior management, somebody said, "I took a flight and it cost me 49 euros yesterday and I slept on the floor of the data center." "Oh, well done." We were sort of applauding each other on how much money we were saving. So that was tough times.
Can you describe how big of a blow that dotcom bubble burst was for the data center industry back then?
Well, 3/4 of our competition went bankrupt.
Okay.
I think British Telecom wrote off about £500 million. Colt wrote off about £500 million. KPN Quest went bankrupt. Carlyle had a bunch of investments that went bankrupt. It was tough times. So we managed to survive through that. But the other thing about a crash is, after a crash, you get a lot of zombie companies.
Yeah.
They've still got 100 million in the bank. The CEO still has his driver outside with his S-Class Mercedes. And, he's not going to drop that. He's going to carry on until there's no money left. So there were quite a few zombie companies running, and you knew they were going to go bankrupt, but, they still had money in the bank. So they burned through it till the end sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until 2004 that we started picking up distressed asset. And we picked up 6 megawatt data center, I think, in Munich for €1 symbolic. In Frankfurt, we bought a whole campus for €14 million, and that was the value of the land. And we also had a €60 million data center with Deutsche Börse and Deutsche Bank on it. So we did, those are the two big acquisitions and some smaller ones. We took over Telehouse Geneva from Telehouse. And because we were running really, really tight, we knew how to run things really, really tight. And so then we took it to float in London on the secondary market in 2006.
Okay. And then you finally sold.
Yeah, I mean, we were pretty exhausted. We'd been through 9 years of roller coaster, and the dot-com thing was really, really, really tough. And so I think one of our shareholders realized that we were a bit burnt out. And so he started sort of tipping off people around. And in the end, we had this amazing competition between AT&T, Savis, and Equinix to bid on us, run by Cyrus Kapadia, who's at Lazard, runs Lazard now in the UK. And Lazard did a fantastic job. And so in the end, Equinix bought us. And as a hot-headed entrepreneur, I thought, right, I'm out of here. I don't want a boss. I don't want somebody telling me what I'm doing. So I was out with Christoph pretty quickly afterwards, which in hindsight, we should have stuck around because it would have been great fun as well. But, c'est la vie.
So, getting that exit after all those years of sweat, blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
How did it feel when it actually happened?
It was a sort of Pyrrhic victory because there were all sorts of things like when we were about to float the business on the night of the float, literally at 11 p.m. the night before we were supposed to go public, we still hadn't covered the book. And you're supposed to have 2 or 3 times the investors that you actually need to have a successful float. It's not like 1 times covered. You've got to be 2 to 3 times covered. And we were like 1.2 times covered, and it wasn't that great. And one of the investors said, look, I'll guarantee at least a third of it, but at this valuation. Yeah. And there was some preference shares and stuff like that, which preference share basically means you're guaranteed to get 3 times your money back and stuff like that. So they cut in at that lower valuation and pretty much wiped out my shareholding with Christoph. So we'd lost 2/3 of our shareholding in the space of a couple of hours. So it wasn't a happy moment floating the business. But we did get a shed load of options after that. But options you pay a lot of income tax on. You lose 40% at least. So it was kind of Pyrrhic victory on that. But we did have a lovely time from float onwards. It was like the best year we'd ever had. And I kept reminding everybody in the company, just savor this moment. This is really cool. We're growing still. We never had a year of less than 30% growth, even through the bad times. Yeah. Everybody loved us, and we did very well. So that was nice. When we sold, I was euphoric, I think. I mean, I went to Equinix's headquarters, and they were in Foster City, California at the time, to go and see Steve Smith, who was the CEO, and he had a lovely PA called Patty, and I remember knocking around the Foster City offices, and she said, hey, guy, Steve's been waiting for you for 30 minutes in his office. But it's true, you don't give a shit anymore, do you? So I guess I was pretty happy at the time.
No worries type of situation in your life. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But then I left Equinix in June 2008. Thinking, right, okay, I'm free. I'm finally free. And psychologically, it's a really hard moment because, I've been running this business. We had 250 staff across Europe, 14 data centers in 4 countries and stuff like that. And suddenly I've got nothing. And, I've got no office to go to in the morning on a Monday and say, oh, did you watch the football? Or what about this? Or what did you do this weekend? Nobody to talk to. And it's really hard. It's really hard. It's really ironic, but, it's really hard. And the one thing that saved me during that period was a friend of mine who was starting up a data center business in South Africa who said, do you want to invest and join the board? And I don't know. And I thought, okay, why not? So I put some money in and I joined the board. And suddenly I had some structure in my life. I had a monthly board meeting with Teraco. And so I joined Teraco's board and helped them. And it was amazing because, of course, I could help them enormously because I knew everything. You know, I've been through it all.
Yeah. And I guess the industry here was then just building.
Yeah, it was just like
taking shape,
starting over again. That's right.
To maybe 2000 in Europe.
So I said, look, you should build an internet exchange. And they said, what's that? And I said, well, okay, there's this guy, Andy Davis, talk to him and he'll teach you all you need to know about internet exchanges. And they said, okay, well, let's do that. And we said, what should we call it? And I said, I don't know. There's a thing in Miami, Florida, which is called the NAP of the Americas, Network Access Point of the Americas. Yeah. So why don't we call it like, I don't know, NAP of Africa or something like that? So it became NAP Africa.
Okay.
So that's my little baby, my claim to fame.
All right. And so is that basically kind of the story how you ended up investing in Africa?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So with Teraco, I put money in. I put a bit more.
Yeah.
I've been on the board. We started looking at Kenya and Nigeria. So I joined Tim Parsonson, the founder, one of the co-founders of Teraco in Nairobi, and we were looking around at some stuff to do some stuff for Teraco. And in the end, Teraco decided not to do it. And I thought, well, let's just do it ourselves then. So that was the birth of IXAfrica. So actually, IXAfrica started. We started looking at IXAfrica in something like 2012. Yeah, it took us years before we actually, put a spade in the ground.
Yeah. Now, when did you then pro-ground for IXAfrica? 2019.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 2019. Yeah.
So basically, like you didn't have this awakening where you go like, yeah, now I want to start investing in emerging markets.
No, but it's always random in life. I mean, then while I was doing the South Africa stuff, EBRD, European Bank, came up to me and said, we got this thing in Russia. We'd like you to be chairman. And so I went to EBRD's offices about 6 weeks later, and they said, well, actually, we're deciding we're not investing in there. We're doing something else or whatever. And I thought, well, I'm curious. I'll go out. And so that was my Russian adventure. So I took a plane to Moscow. I talked to the founder, who was an English guy, been brought up in the US. He was also a rock musician.
Yeah.
And he had a sort of mid-Atlantic accent, sounded a bit arrogant, but I hadn't seen him because we're still in 2010, something like that. People, Zoom's not really happening that much. Skype's just about starting up.
Yeah, exactly.
So I hadn't really seen him. So I turned up in Moscow and he said, I'll see you in this TGI Fridays. So I'm in this TGI Fridays in my suit and tie, because as you did in those days.
Yeah.
And this guy turns up and he's got a leather jacket, leather trousers, Bono haircut and weird sort of multicolored sunglasses and an earring. And I thought, this is stupid. When's my flight back? I'm out of here, And after about 5 minutes, I realized that I was the crazy off the wall guy and he was the very structured, very serious guy, despite his look.
Yeah.
And so we immediately clicked. And I thought, I'll try and raise money for this. So about a year and a half later, IFC joined as the keystone investor.
All right. So if you compare kind of your experience in investing in Russia back then and now, like investing in Africa, is there any similarities? And how do these different regions compare?
I think the simple thing is you got to really get under the skin of the culture of the country, how people operate, and make really good friends who you really trust, who are totally straight down the line. And I think once you've got that little ecosystem of friends, then you can really execute very well.
By the way, have you ever thought like, what are the kind of your hidden internal indicators on who you can trust? Or is it just a gut feeling?
It's a gut feeling, and that's probably why I'm quite a good entrepreneur on the early stage businesses, and I sort of start checking out when there's more than 200 staff or something like that. I'm that early stage guy who likes to work with his gut.
Yeah.
And when we were looking for land in Nairobi, I met this Indian family, third, fourth generation Kenyan, and we'd been looking at different sites, and then my friend Clement put me in touch with this guy, and we met him. And there was an immediate connection. Yeah. And I could see that he was, it was a very honest family, very straight family. And so basically I sort of looked him in the eye and shook his hand and said, I will buy your land for the price you want for it. Got no money, but I will buy it. And so we shook hands and ate a bit of chocolate, and stuff like that, which is what you do in tradition. And about 18 months later, I bought the piece of land with a sort of family office that we found that was investing in the business.
And so you've been basically building for, having hyperscalers in your mind since the beginning, right?
Yeah.
With the IXAfrica. So what made you do that decision?
Just because, we could see what was going on in Europe and the US and Southeast Asia. And so it was pretty obvious that the hyperscalers were coming. It's pretty obvious that there'd be South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria. But also the project that we were doing in Kenya, it took a long time to raise the money.
Yeah.
And during that long slog of almost 2 years, there were a couple of new players that appeared on the market. So the original idea was, let's build a small data center in Nairobi, and it'll be a nice interconnection point and everything. And then suddenly we found we were going to be the fourth player in the market. And it's never good to be fourth in the market. So I thought, okay, rather than use the money to build this little data center and then run it, we're going to blow the money on a piece of land and a design. And then we'll run out of money. And we're going to design it for hyperscalers. So we're going to be the first hyperscale-ready data center in East Africa. So that's what we did. So we blew all the cash on basically just getting what's called a stage 4 design for 22.5 megawatts, and bringing the first bit of power into the data center and building a bit of a shell. But we weren't operational.
Yeah.
And then we had to look for a second investor on the back of that. So it was kind of taking a bit of a risk.
Yeah. And I guess, by now, we all know that it's been, the wave for hyperscalers to come into the continent has been slower than expected. So has that been surprising for you, or kind of like expected? That were you always like kind of fine, it's going to take some time?
I've been through the dotcom thing, so I kind of know that you always got a bit of spare cash flow, you've always got a bit of spare cash, you're always ready just in case the market slows for a couple of years. So we're fine, and we got so much runway. There's no hurry in the business. But yes, it's a bit disappointing because everybody was sort of expecting, a whole load of hyperscalers from Morocco to Kenya about 3-4 years ago, and nothing really happened. I think it's beginning to bubble up again now.
Yeah. That's kind of the sentiment as well, and also based on some rumors from here and there.
That's right.
There's
exactly.
a bit of activity picking up now. So I think it's definitely good news. All right. So kind of your role today, like what's your day-to-day role? What do you do?
Spin plates, I suppose. I'm a bit ADHD, so I kind of like lots of stimulation, lots of things going on. And maybe it's the best thing for me. So, I've got my Kenyan business, which I co-founded. I've got Russia, but that's another story. And I've got a very small shareholding now these days anyway, but that's another story. You have to wait 5-6 years for that to calm down.
Yeah.
I'm on the board of a Brazilian data center company, Elia Data Centers, with Alessandro, my friend, crazy Italian friend, as with Goldman Sachs. I advise PIMCO in Europe with Apto, built-to-suit data centers. And I'm on the board of Reton, which is a Eurasian networking company. In fact, Reton is in the top 10 of global network operators these days, as of last 2 months ago, I think. So I do all these things, and also the main job is with Helios Investment Partners, because when they came and invested in my Kenyan business, and during that negotiation to invest in it, they said, "Hey, why don't you join us and help us do digital infrastructure across Africa?" Okay. If you've built data centers in Moscow, you can probably do Africa quite well. So I thought, yeah, why not? Let's do that. So I joined Helios, and almost 3 years ago now. Okay. And it's just such a fantastic team there. It's such a good team. They're like the Goldman Sachs of Africa. They're just the art of the possible. And we've just announced a big deal with Egypt Telecom to take over their data centers there. So we're on a bit of a roll, and like a lot of these things, it's taken a while to prepare. So we're preparing the terrain for about 2 years, and now, bam, we're beginning to execute.
And Helios,
quite exciting.
Helios is based where?
Helios is London-based, founded in 2004 by Baba and Tope, two Nigerian British people who are just really, really good. And again, I see a bit of my original early stage startup stuff with Christoph, my business partner, because Baba and Topi are a bit yin and yang as well. So there's very, very strong leadership in Helios. Fantastic team.
Oh, great. We're happy to learn more about them. So, okay, so you've done a lot. That's by now, after 50 minutes, that's clear. So if you look back to your career, what's the kind of moment that makes you the proudest?
IXAfrica, the first one, I think. The first one definitely made me proud. I think when we got to the point where we got that management team really humming and everybody was doing exactly what they felt they needed to do, nobody was stepping on anybody's toes. There was so much teamwork across the organization. It was brilliant. And just to see that, it's rare that you see management teams really executing so well. I've seen that. Unfortunately, we got our Russian team exactly where we wanted it to be about 3 weeks before the war started. So that's not very helpful. Yeah, but I think building teams, I love that sort of management, building those management teams up. I think that's probably one of the proudest things, yeah. And
is there kind of a mistake you'd like to share that from where you learned the most? What do you learn?
Oh, gosh, a load of mistakes. But one of the big mistakes was that when I started my first startup, IXAfrica, we were trying to find a chairman for this, what was a PowerPoint show business, basically, had nothing. And this crusty old chairman said, "Oh, come and meet me at my club in St. James's. Bring your wife along." So, fine, okay. So I turned up with my wife, and he looked at her and he said, "Do you know what you're letting yourself in for? Your husband's going to be an entrepreneur. It's going to be, full on." Well, he's really nice, actually. He didn't become my chairman yet. Yeah. But so she accepted that I started this business. And, we went through all of that. And, it was hard because I was 24/7. So you're, having a shave on a Sunday morning and you're thinking, is that really the right commercial director for this business or whatever? And your wife's talking to you about something, you're completely checked out. You're just so focused on the business. So, but we'd accepted. When I did my Russian business with the World Bank, I kind of got sucked in. I didn't really ask her. I didn't say, "Oh, by the way, do you mind if we go?" That horrible experience I went through for 9 years, which is crazy, all-consuming. Well, I'm going to do it again. And I didn't say that to her. So I think she, rightly so, she was saying, "Would it be nice if you'd asked me, before you got sucked into this?" So I think that's kind of a regret in a way that I should have asked her and said, "Are you okay with this? Because this is another rocky ride."
Yeah. So it was another 24/7 type of.
It was, and anything Slavic nations is very up and down. Everything's marvelous and everything's a disaster, and so it's a roller coaster ride, and it was a roller coaster ride. Yeah. My co-founder died at 53 of a heart attack. All sorts of crazy things happened during that business. So it was, and then the war, and it was very Russian. It's very up and down, but anyway, that's another story. Oh, but Kenya is my third startup from zero, from a piece of paper. So I've done 3 real startups from absolutely nothing. Teraco was kind of me, but Tim already had a little team before I joined. Yeah. So I've done 3.5 startups from zero.
Do you have any good stress management tips?
Playing a band. Take time off. The best thing, the best decisions are made when you're walking around. Exactly. Don't stick in the office. But again, it's my ADHD profile. I can't sit down at a desk for more than 20 minutes without getting up. I'm always walking around. So, but because I'm sort of slightly off the wall and loads of ideas and stuff, there is like an ADHD tax that you pay. My life is probably 20% more expensive than most people's because I might do impulse purchases or whatever, or make impulse decisions. Yeah. And I have a PA who I've worked with for goodness knows, 12 years now, something like that. And I have to have a PA because otherwise I'll be accepting meetings, and I'll be in meetings 7 times a day or whatever, or working on crazy projects. So, I bounce a lot off her, bounce a lot of ideas off her, and she sort of brings some sense to my
frame. That's right. Structure.
Yeah. Especially now I'm on a number of boards. I'm advising Helios and PIMCO or whatever. I've got to make sure all that works properly.
Yeah, 'cause, coordination is actually super stressful. Like if you like coordinating meetings, coordinating.
Yeah, that's right.
That's actually
So I
really,
don't do
really
any of
tough.
that.
Yeah.
You know, somebody wants a meeting, I say, oh, just, email Victoria and she'll find a slot, and that's fine.
Yeah. But I think on the other hand, the ADHD profile also is a source of amazing creativity.
Yeah, it is.
Like if it's channeled in
That's
the
right.
right ways, it's like
At
these
IX
people
Europe.
are unstoppable.
At IXAfrica, once somebody said, yeah, Guy's amazing. He's got 100 ideas a day. One's really good.
But that's how it is. Like you have to come up with a lot of ideas to find those ones, to create ones. It's the same thing with the songs. I think the famous quote goes that I think, you probably know 2 or 3 Mozart songs.
Yeah.
Do you know how many he wrote?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah.
Like 3,000.
Yeah. Goodness
There
me.
you go.
Goodness me. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, I'm not doing 3,000 startups, that's for sure.
But 3,000 ideas, easy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what would you say to someone who's now somewhere in African continent thinking that, hey, I want to build a data center? What's your first advice?
I guess email me first. Have a chat. No, but more seriously, even in any startup, don't do it on your own. Find somebody who complements your skills and do it as at least 2 people, because it's a soul destroying thing trying to raise money, trying to do a startup, trying to get people, the whole thing. You're doing everything.
Yeah.
And nobody can do it on their own. You just burn out very quickly. Unless you're Elon Musk or somebody like that, which is, he's cabled differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he's channels his burnout into something else. Let's not get let's not get into that. But okay, good. So 2 things. What makes you worried about Africa's digital future in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'm not particularly worried about it, but we certainly need more. And we were having a discussion with the World Bank this morning, and Amin from N+1 came out with a very important point, which is it's all very well building infrastructure, but we kind of need content. And as he said, everybody in Africa is watching the same YouTube from Marseille at the moment.
Yeah.
So the idea that there's a whole load of content in Africa going somewhere else, well, no, there's not enough content here. And that means, the best thing that people like the World Bank could do is, instead of give governments money to build data centers, which is a terrible idea, give governments money to move to the cloud, move their traffic lights and their health systems to the cloud, and with a condition that they use commercial operators, commercial data centers, commercial networks, or whatever. And that would really get things moving. If you look at how the Dubai market's exploded, even given the fact that you've got a semi sort of duopoly with Etisalat and Du, the fact is they could attract so many data center players because they had all these $200 million a year cloud contracts that they were issuing out. So that got all the cloud players into the country. In Africa, no one single country has enough oomph, if you like, to generate the business case for a lot of these cloud players. Hence, we still only got South Africa with sort of 1.5, 2 regions.
Yeah.
And that's it. Whereas it should be at least South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Morocco, Egypt by now.
Yeah.
There's stuff happening in Egypt, that's good.
Yeah.
But and then aggregating for the other countries as well. But that's the thing. And then the other thing that concerns me is the whole deregulation and governments. You just don't want governments in your hair, especially if it's in telecoms. Deregulated is great. South Africa's great, nicely deregulated. Nigeria's great, Kenya's great. But other countries, they've still got one telecoms provider, and they're just toast. They just forget them. Just nobody cares. Nobody's interested. You talk to the international clients, nobody's interested.
Yeah.
So until some Minister of Trade, Minister of Telecoms or whatever becomes the hero and opens the market up, those countries will just be forgotten.
Exactly. So what makes you optimistic?
There's massive innovation going on. I mean, the advent of Starlink has really done something for the African market. No, it won't replace fibre, and it's an expensive proposition, and we need loads and loads of fibre in the townships and in the cities or whatever. But it will become 10% of the whole digital infrastructure movement across Africa. If you're in the middle of nowhere in Africa, in a small town, then Starlink could be the solution. So those low Earth orbit satellites, and it's not just Starlink, then we'll have Kuiper, then we'll have 1,000 sails and all the rest. But that's going to really improve connectivity across Africa, I think.
Yeah. Why should we care about African data centers?
Why should we care?
Yeah.
Because Africa only has between 0.6% and 1% of the world's data centers. And again, as the VP for digital at the World Bank said this morning, Africa is actually is moving further behind the world market because in the developed world, they're spending billions and billions from South Korea to China to Europe to the US to wherever. They're spending billions on AI at the moment, whereas Africa is spending nothing because it doesn't have that resource. So the divide is getting exponentially bigger by the day.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to do some leapfrogging across Africa. And especially if you've got maybe 30% of the world's population under 20 is on this continent, we really need to work on education, sports and entertainment, things for young people. We don't need healthcare for the elderly. We don't need robots. That's what the demographic time bomb countries like China or Europe need. Yeah, that's right. They'll need that. We'll all be looked after by a robot. But in Africa, they don't need that. Yeah. We need jobs and we need creativity and talent. The good thing is, with 30% of the world's under 20s, they're pretty good at tech. And you walk around Nairobi and there might be somebody earning $2 a day, but they're watching TikTok videos on their phone. So they're plugged in. How can we move that into more creativity and generation of wealth?
Thank you, Guy. It was amazing to hear your story, and thanks for sharing. It's good to have you.
That's a pleasure. Thanks.
Cheers.
This podcast is part of the Data Governance in Africa initiative, helping the African Union shape data policies, enable cross-border data flows, and build secure, sustainable digital infrastructure. Funded by the EU and 5 member states, it supports a unified digital market in Africa.